His shovel struck bone. Too small. He dropped to his knees, brushed back the dust with his bare hands. A child, Apache, burned along the ribs. Jaw shattered. He buried her fast. No prayers, no words. Just dirt. By nightfall, they came. 4 horses, painted faces, weapons sheathed but not for peace. They did not ask who he was. They asked how she died. Their leader stepped forward, dropped the child's beaded necklace in the dirt. He had not buried that, had not even seen it. The beads were clean, unburned. She had died after the fire, which meant someone else had found her first. And the man standing at the door now knew he had just buried someone else's crime. He sat still for a long time after they rode off. The necklace lay where they left it. He didn't touch it, didn't move. The silence pressed in harder than before. His boots were still damp with grave dirt. The edge of the shovel blade rested against the wall. A smudge of ash across his sleeve. The kind that clung after you touched something burned too deep. He saw it again. The body. Not just the shape in the dirt, but the child, curled like she had tried to breathe one more time. Ribs cracked, one leg twisted under. He had not searched her pockets, had not called out to see if anyone claimed her. Just a hole in the earth, just hands that shook as they covered her. He rose and stepped out onto the porch. The sky held still. No sound except the creak of the saddle where one horse had kicked before leaving. The trail was already fading, but the image didn't. Ashes, still smoldering that morning. He had gone alone. No one else came. The town stayed back, said it wasn't their fight. He'd passed the burned fences. The meat smoke had turned sour. Bodies were already stiff in the dust, flies thick. He remembered a child's toy half melted in a basin. He had found her just past the creek bed, face down, hair matted to her back. He hadn't rolled her over? He couldn't, not then, not after the last time. That one had been Winter, his own child. Fever, too fast. No doctor would ride out that far in snow. He had dug then too, alone. Placed her doll beside her feet, pressed her hair flat, and folded the blanket. No one knew. He had not spoken her name since. Now here it was again. Small hands, empty eyes. A silence that asked for more than dirt. He sat down on the step and pressed the heel of his hand into his temple. The necklace caught the sun beside his boot. Bright threads, delicate beads. No smoke on them, no soot. Someone had touched her after the fire, someone else, and he had buried her without asking why. The rider came in crooked, one spur missing, one eye squinting from the sun like it hurt too much to open all the way. The horse stopped without being told. He slid down, boots hit the dirt hard, whiskey sweat already thick on his shirt. Dust clung to the band of his hat like a shadow that had been following him too long. He didn't ask to come in, just walked up to the porch and stood over the necklace, towed it once, then looked up slow. They rode in quiet, he said. The Apache. No drums, no trail fire, no signal. Came like ghosts from the East Ridge, every one of them marked in grief. Not vengeance. Grief. He sat without permission, leaned his elbows on his knees, spit once into the dust, said he'd seen raids before, but never after the fact. They weren't hunting. They were mourning. The cowboy listened, did not speak, just watched the way the tracker's fingers kept twitching near his coat pocket. Finally, the old man pulled something out, a strip of cloth. Torn, stained, held it up, said he found it near a ridge trail west of the creek. Said a wagon passed that way just before it all went up. Not after. Before. The cowboy blinked once. The tracker nodded like he expected that. Said the wagon left town late. Real late. Too late for trade. Too early for freight. Covered tracks. Tarp pulled low. Someone knew the raid was coming. Someone left before it. The tracker said nothing else for a long while. Just stared into the open distance like something might come back if he stared long enough. Then he wiped his hands on his thighs, cursed under his breath, stood, Said he'd ride north by morning. Too many fires around here. Too many men trying to hide from their own shadows. Before he left, he looked back once, told the cowboy not to ask questions the desert already answered in blood, told him not to cross Apache grief unless he meant to bleed with them. Then he rode out, slow, crooked, dust trailing behind like a ghost that wouldn't follow. The cowboy stood still for a long time, then bent down, picked up the cloth, ran his fingers over the dried pattern. It wasn't from a saddlebag. It wasn't from the child. It was from a dress. Too small for a woman, too clean for the fire, too fresh for the grave. The ash had settled, lighter now, no smoke, no heat, just the weight of what had been. He rode in slow, boots down before the horse had fully stopped. The wind rolled grit over what was left, charred bones, blackened pots, the remains of a cradle frame crushed beneath a scorched beam. He stepped past it, eyes low. Let the silence speak. Most of the ground was gray and cracked, but near the edge of the creek bed, the dust changed, softer, thinner, as if something had disturbed it after the fire. He knelt, brushed the ash back with his palm. Prints, small, lighter than a woman's, pointed outward. Then a drag mark, one long line that broke now and then, like a body too weak to crawl. Blood flecked the sand between the marks, dark, dry, fresh only by a day or two. He followed it, step by slow step. It led past the burned hides, past a shattered drum, toward a thin cluster of mesquite near the south ridge. There it stopped. No more drag, no more blood. But something else caught his eye. A branch snapped clean at the midpoint, not burned, split sharp, fresh. He turned, scanned the ridge, low brush, bent grass. Someone had knelt there. Recently. Maybe that same night. He moved toward it, climbed slow, careful not to disturb the tracks too much. At the crest, he crouched, looked back. From here, the whole burned camp was visible. Clear view. Whoever stood here saw it all. The fire, the screams, the ones who fled, the ones who did not. He placed a hand on the ground, still warm from the sun. No wind, no sound. But in the dirt beside him, a heel print. Wade, deep, booted. Not Apache. He stood, slowly, body stiff from the ride. He scanned the horizon. No movement, no sound but the creak of his saddle behind him. He took the cloth from his pocket, held it beside the print. Too small for this boot, too fragile to have come this far alone. Someone had carried her. Dragged her maybe, but not back toward camp, away from it. He looked again at the low trail leading west, a faint line through brush and dry grass, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Then he followed it, one slow step at a time. Something was wrong with the shape of the trail. It curved too soon, like it wanted to be hidden, like it had been made for eyes that already knew where it led. The town sat quiet behind warped fences and heat-struck paint. No banners, no riders, just the sound of creaking signs and a crow pacing along the church rail. He tied the horse slow, stepped down, boots dry and cracked from the ride. No one looked up. The sheriff's office leaned to one side, shutters half open. Dust collected on the badge nailed to the door. He pushed it open. The hinge groaned. Inside, the sheriff leaned back in his chair, boots on the desk, hat low over his brow. The cowboy stepped in, dropped the cloth first, then the beads. The sheriff did not move, just lifted one eye, said it was tragic what happened, said the raid was over, said there was no use dragging ghosts through town dust. The cowboy did not answer. He waited, let the silence sit. Then said the beads were clean, said the child had not died in the fire. That made the boots come down. The sheriff stood, slower than needed, like the room had turned thick. He stepped around the desk, picked up the cloth, held it a little too long. Then he folded it, placed it on the edge of the table like it was nothing more than a used napkin. Said there were things the Apache did not want explained. said they already blamed the man who dug the hole, said they did not need a reason to return. And when they did, it would not be to talk. The cowboy's jaw tensed. He turned to leave. That was when he saw him. The deputy, standing just outside the cell room, arms crossed, eyes too still, scratches along his neck. Not deep, just sharp enough to leave skin raw, like something had fought to get away. New boots, too clean for the man who wore them, too clean except for the soles. Ash still clung around the seams. The cowboy looked once, then again. Longer. The deputy shifted. His weight. Pressed a hand against the doorframe. No words, no gesture, just a faint tremble in the fingers. The sheriff called from behind, said there was nothing out there but bones, said some questions could burn a man faster than fire. The cowboy stepped into the light. Dust swirled around his boots. He did not speak, did not look back, but the beads were still in his hand, pressed tight between the fingers, warm from his skin, cold from something deeper. The door swung shut behind him, and the town returned to silence, except now it listened. The fire cracked low beside him, a weak sound, more ember than flame. He sat cross-legged in the dirt with his back against the post, hands open on his knees. The beads lay between them, small, bright, wrung out here in the dust. Night wrapped around the homestead in a stillness that felt older than the boards beneath him. Nothing moved but the shifting glow of the coals. He lowered his head, closed his eyes. The warmth on his face drew up another fire. Not this one, not this place. Snow. A winter wind that cut through cloth and bone alike. A small cabin half buried by drifts. His breath rising in thin white clouds. She had been bundled in every blanket he had, skin hot, eyes glassy, tiny fingers clawing weakly at the air before falling still. He had held her until her body cooled, held her long after, until his arms grew numb and the sky turned a hard gray that offered no mercy, no doctor, no neighbors, no hope. A cough. Then nothing. He saw it again with perfect clarity, the tilt of her head on his shoulder, the way he pressed his cheek to hers, hoping for breath, hoping for anything. He dug in frozen ground with hands that bled, every shovelful heavier than the last. He laid her inside, smoothed her hair, tucked the blanket beneath her chin. No mark, no carving, no prayer. Just earth, just a father who failed. And he never said a word about her again, not to a soul. Not even to himself, except in sleepless hours like this. He opened his eyes. The present settled back around him. Softer but no kinder. The child he buried yesterday was not his, yet the weight was the same. Small body, broken body. A life that ended in his hands whether he wished it or not. He had not turned her over, had not looked for signs that she still breathed, had not called out to anyone nearby. He had seen the size of her, seen the darkness on her back, and he had decided it was easier to give her to the earth. A clean act? A simple act? A quiet act? But not a brave one. The more he replayed it, the more he felt the truth pressing in. He had buried her fast because he did not want to feel what it would stir up. He had chosen silence again. The same silence that haunted every winter night since the day he lost his own child. He looked down at the beads in his palm. They glowed faintly in the firelight, colors alive against the dust. He closed his fist around them, tight. He knew now that burying the girl without knowing how she died had been more than a mistake. It had been fear. The same fear that once kept him from speaking his daughter's name. The fire sank lower. The guilt rose higher. And somewhere in the dark beyond the porch, the desert listened. The dust rose before they were seen. Then the horses broke over the ridge. 6. No paint this time. No war cries. Just silence, thick enough to drag behind them. He stepped from the porch before they dismounted, stood still. Hands loose at his sides, they formed a half circle in the yard. Not close, not far. just close enough that every rider could reach for a weapon if needed. The one in front remained on his horse, older than the rest, face worn like dry stone, eyes still as water that had not moved in years. He spoke low, each word measured, not a question, not an accusation, a sentence carved from something heavier than breath. One day, bring them the truth, not a story, not a guess. The truth. The cowboy nodded once, a slow motion that barely reached his neck. His mouth was dry, his boots heavier than they had been a moment ago. He asked why. Why this child? Why this one death brought them here? Why her loss cracked the silence of the desert so loud? The answer came without pause. She was the last daughter of their medicine woman, not just blood, not just lineage. She carried something old, something sacred, now broken, now lost. The old man dismounted, walked forward, stopped within arm's reach. He reached into his coat, pulled out something wrapped in deer hide, unfolded it slowly, laid it on the ground between them. Feathers, charcoal markings, dried herbs tied with red thread, ritual pieces, tools of healing, now useless, now tainted. He said her death carried a stain. Until that stain was avenged, none of them would rest. Not her spirit, not her mother's, not the tribe's. He turned, left the bundle behind, mounted again. The others followed, no words, no looks, just hooves pressing into sand. The cowboy stood alone again, sun high, no shadows yet long enough to cover what had passed. He looked down at the bundle, knelt, lifted it carefully, held it like something fragile. Inside the folds, tucked beneath the herbs, was a single braid of black hair tied with red and white twine. He recognized it, had seen it when he turned the child's body, just before he covered her back with dust. He clenched his jaw, closed the bundle, rose slow. The beads were still in his pocket, now joined by hair and time, and the weight of a question that would not wait longer than morning. He turned toward the barn, toward the saddle, toward the trail that pointed back through ash, because one day was not much, but it would be enough if he stopped lying to himself. The sun crept low behind him as he rode. No wind, no sound but hooves pressing dry into the earth. The trail curved through a dried-out creek bed. Twice he dismounted to check a broken branch. Twice he found faint impressions of wagon wheels buried in dust. Not fresh, not old, just forgotten. He followed west, into low-rock country where the air held still and the sage grew sparse. The land pinched into a bluff rimmed with boulders the size of cattle. He circled once, then again saw it, tucked behind a wall of stone and brush, blackened frame, iron hoops warped from heat, a wagon, or what was left of one. He led the horse behind a ridge, tied it in shade, approached slow. The wheels had collapsed inward. One axle snapped. Scorch marks ran up the slats in jagged bloom, but the fire had not gutted it, only scorched, only enough to hide something. He climbed the back brace, stepped onto the flatbed. No crates, no sacks, just ash and a dark coil of rope. He knelt, touched it, sticky, dried red crusted where the knot had held tight, one end frayed, the other burnt. He looked farther back, toward the wheel well. Found a small shape caught beneath the brace, a moccasin, child size, strap torn clean, heel rubbed raw with dirt. He held it in one hand, weightless. Except it wasn't. This was no trail accident. This was no runaway. This was where she died. Not in the fire. Not among the others. Here. Dragged or carried. Bound or thrown. He did not know. But this place held the end of her breath. He stood slowly, turned full circle. The rocks stood silent. The canyon narrow. A place meant to hide, not to run. He stepped down, traced his fingers along the ground, found more ash. But it was strange. Not wagon ash, not wood ash. Fabric, hair, bone maybe. A false fire. Burned after the act. Burned to cover it, He pressed his hand to the dirt, felt only warmth from the sun. But something else lingered, a shadow of fear, a scent of metal and silence. He rose, took the moccasin, took the rope. His hands were shaking, not from anger, not from grief, from knowing. He had buried a child with burn marks on her ribs, but no smoke in her lungs. She had died here, and someone had made sure no one would know it. Until now. He turned back toward his horse, toward the trail that led home, and toward the man who wore new boots and did not flinch when the sheriff lied. He rode into town with the sun behind him, shadows long, boots dry with dust from the canyon, rope and moccasin tied tight to his saddle horn. The street was quiet, the saloon open but empty, only the sound of a hammer tapping slow on the far side of the blacksmith shop. He walked straight to the jail, pushed through the door without knocking. The sheriff was gone. Only the deputy sat inside, chair tilted back, hat low. The cowboy tossed the rope onto the floor, then the moccasin. The chair creaked forward, boots hit wood. The hat stayed low. No words. The cowboy stared at the scratches along the man's neck, watched his jaw tighten, watched the breath catch once and try to settle. He asked how long the girl ran, how far she got, how loud she screamed before she went quiet. The deputy stood, too fast, one hand near his hip. The cowboy didn't move. He asked if the necklace had been worth it, if the child's blood came off his hands easy in the river. The deputy's voice cracked. Just once. He said she saw him, said she ran, said he didn't mean to, only meant to stop her. The room went still. He said she wouldn't stop crying, wouldn't stop calling for someone, anyone. He grabbed her, tried to quiet her. She bit him. He threw her down. She didn't move after that. He waited. Watched the fire in the hills. Watched the rest of it burn. Then he carried her to the rocks, tried to burn the wagon, tried to hide the rope. Took the necklace before he left. He didn't know she was the last one. Didn't know they'd come looking. Didn't know someone would care enough to dig that deep. He looked up, eyes wide now. Like maybe the cowboy would understand. Like maybe he wanted forgiveness. The cowboy didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't offer anything. He picked up the rope, held it like a question, then dropped it again. He told the deputy to saddle up, to ride with him, to tell the Apache himself. The deputy went pale, said no, said they'd kill him. The cowboy said yes, said that was the point. He stepped back and held the door, waited. The deputy looked down at the floor, at the beads, at the torn strap. Then he moved, slow, like every step took something he would not get back. They rode out before the sun fell, 2 horses, 1 truth, and the desert waiting ahead in silence. Part 10. The sun cleared the eastern ridge as they rode. Dust curled behind them in steady lines. No talk, no noise, but the steady creak of leather and the dull knock of hooves against stone. The deputy rode with wrists bound in front, eyes fixed on the trail, mouth shut. No plea, no apology. The cowboy rode behind him, close. Not close enough to comfort, just close enough to keep him moving. By midday, the hills opened wide. They reached the place where the Apache waited, not hidden, not armed for war, just present, still. 3 dozen stood in silence as the riders approached. No signal was given. But the deputy stopped, lowered his head, dismounted. The cowboy dismounted too, loosened the rope, let the deputy walk forward on his own. The circle parted. The leader stood waiting, the one with the stone eyes. He did not speak. He did not look at the cowboy. He looked only at the man who had taken the child. There was no shouting, no accusation, only stillness, the kind that pressed down on every breath. The deputy dropped to his knees, hands shaking now, shoulders tight. He whispered something the cowboy could not hear. 2 Apache stepped forward, took him gently by the arms, lifted him, led him out of the circle. No resistance, no struggle. The circle closed. The cowboy stood alone, unmoving. He waited for it. The judgment, the blade, the fire. But none came. Instead, the leader stepped forward, slow, measured. He held something in his palm, lifted it toward the cowboy. The necklace, the same one that had been left in the dirt, the one he had buried in silence, now returned. Not as a weapon, not as a warning, but as a burden. The cowboy took it, his fingers curled around the beads, still warm, somehow still carrying her weight. The leader spoke once, low, clear. Not a threat, not a blessing. Only this: carry her. When others lie, you speak. Then he stepped back, turned. The rest followed. No one looked back. The cowboy stood in the dust with the necklace in his hand, the sun high, the silence full. He did not move for a long time. Only when the wind shifted and the last rider disappeared behind the ridge did he turn back toward the trail home, not lighter, not cleaner, but changed, because he had done what the fire could not. He had uncovered truth, and now he would carry it, not in his mouth, but in his hands. And in the silence that followed behind him wherever he rode, the marker sat low in the dirt, no name carved, just a single stone set upright, a feather tucked into its crack, and a string of beads looped gently at the base. The cowboy stood over it, with a small carving knife in one hand. Dust clung to the back of his neck, shirt wet with labor. He ran the blade once more across the stone. Not to inscribe, just to smooth, to finish what could not be finished. Behind him, a narrow garden had begun to take shape, rough rows marked by half-buried sticks. No food, no crop, just flowers, bright red bursts, thin yellow stalks, stubborn blue petals reaching out from dry earth. He came out each morning before the heat settled in, carried water in a cracked tin, said nothing to the plants, only watched, knees bent, hands in dirt, same as before. Sometimes riders passed through, wagon men, traders. Once a group of surveyors scouting new rail paths. They asked about the marker. He never told them a full story, only the same line each time she was a child. Someone hurt her, and the land remembers. He never said the name of the deputy, never said the fire, never said what he saw in the canyon rocks, but he told them she died, not because she ran, but because someone was afraid of what she saw. That was the part he always said, slowly. So they would hear it right. Fear had done it. Not rage, not accident, just fear and silence. And he said silence did not bury it deep enough. When they asked about the beads, he said they were given back to him, not as a gift, but as a weight. So he would not forget. A child had died. A people had mourned, and the truth had almost stayed under the dirt forever. Now it grew here, in flowers that fought for color, in soil that cracked and healed again, in the hands of a man who had once buried his own child without words. He sat beside the marker at dusk, hat in his lap, back to the wind. The garden shifted softly behind him, the air dry but kind. He touched the necklace once, then let his hand fall away. He did not speak, did not need to. Because when people came now, they stopped. They looked. They asked. And when they left, they remembered, not her name, but her story. And the truth that silence never saves anyone, only the telling does. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, and comment on the Old Western Tales.